It's time to get the latest scoop on all things New York Jets, and there's only one man that can provide that. Boy Green Daily starts right now. Zoinks! It is unequivocally the Super Bowl for New York Jet fans.
Field Yates, baby. Field gosh darn Yates. Let's bring him on the show. Come on, people. Aaron Rodgers is joining the show. What's up, Connor? But Trevor gosh darn Sycamore, baby. For me, personally, my favorite New York Jet of all time.
Wow, it's great to be on. What an intro that was right there.
Paul, nobody does an intro like you, man.
Paul, you give the best intro of literally any podcast that I've ever been.
I'm gonna lose my gosh darn bananas.
Good morning. What's poppin', everybody? Paul Eston Jr., a.k.a. Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com. This is Boy Green Daily, a daily New York Jets video show. You guys can also listen to it in the audio-only version wherever you find your podcast. Let's bring in this man, Zack friggin' Rosenblatt, the Athletic, the Can't Wait podcast. I mean, this guy is freaking spectacular. So let's bring him on the show. I love having this guy on, and it is Zack Rosenblatt. What's up, Zack?
What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Man, it's good. It's good to chat with you. It's been a hot second, so let's. It's been a wild season, man. Let me just ask you this: how is it, Zack? You've done a lot of things in your sports career here. Covering the Jets, what's that like?
That's such a broad question with so many different ways I can answer it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a journey, is what I would call it. It's a bumpy journey. It's just like every week, and are we allowed to curse on here?
yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. Like I tweeted this, I think during the game where Xavier Newman came in and played center. Like every week, you never know what shit they're going to throw at you. It's just like you're going to see something that you've never seen before. And that's kind of what happens with this Jets team. Like, it's just like they reach new levels of highs, new lows, and it all comes within like a 3-week span. And 1 week the season's over, and then the next week they're going to make it to the playoffs. And this year and last year are pretty much the same year in a lot of ways. It feels like you could just remove the Aaron Rodgers part. And that's kind of where we're at now. Like, we're back where, everybody's freaking out again. And I understand it completely and agree with some of it. But also, if they beat the Bills on Sunday, then all of a sudden the tone is going to change pretty quick. And then knowing the Jets, then maybe they turn around and lose the Dolphins, and then everybody's down on it again. And they beat the Falcons, everybody's happy again. And it's just going to be the endless cycle. And that's what being a Jets fan is, I imagine. And that's what covering the Jets is like.
I see. What a great synopsis that is. I'm curious. So you said that like this season and last season are pretty identical in a lot of ways, and I'd agree. What do you make of the as a guy who's covering it every day? The Aaron Rodgers splash. We're getting Pat McAfee updates of like him confirming or denying reports here. Oh, Melissa Stark said mid-December. Well, I don't know. And so like it's like a rumor mill every time he's on. Is that annoying to you? Do you enjoy the Aaron Rodgers splash? Like, he tore his Achilles. Most people that tear their Achilles disappear from the map. They're a ghost as it pertains to a football team. But Aaron Rodgers, obviously, his presence is still very much with the team. Does that annoy you? Does that bother you that you got to cover that? What's your take?
I wouldn't say it annoys me. It's just definitely a very unique experience because, I've joked with some reporters like, we would like to talk to him, obviously, because we haven't talked to him since the injury happened. But also in my head, I'm like what more can he say that he doesn't say already on, like, there's definitely stuff he could say, but like, he just like says, he talks for like 30 minutes to an hour every week on Pat McAfee.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's the pregame stuff. And so it does feel like he's still a part of the team in a way. And I wouldn't say it's annoying because I feel like it's not as like much I have to cover the weekly Pat McAfee as maybe I would have if he was playing because, right now he's a little more than a spectator because he's on the headset, but you know what I mean? Like he's not playing the game. So it's a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, this is part of the Aaron Rodgers experience. Like he's a part, like it's never going to go, you're never going to go very long without Aaron Rodgers headline, I think is kind of how things go.
And Zach, you've had some scoopski potatoes to give the Impractical Jokers reference on some of these. Aaron Rodgers on the headset and being heavily involved because, for those who don't know, obviously he can't be directly speaking with Zach. That is Nathaniel Hackett's gig, but he's still in the conversation with all the other coaches and people that are on the call. And so you've mentioned several times, obviously, since he's been back, apparently, according to McAfee and Rodgers, he's going to be back full time near Thanksgiving, which is coming up, obviously, next week, full time in the building and doing all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious with this, heavily influenced role he has on the headset. What does that really mean? Is he just sharing tips and tricks? Like, how far does that go from your understanding?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. He's on the headset. He hears that all the coaches are having a conversation on there, and he's a part of that conversation with Saleh and Hackett and Todd Downing and Keith Carter, like all the guys, whoever's on the headset. I think there's a handful of them. I forget the exact number that you can have on there, but yeah, he's making suggestions. He's reacting to decisions they make. He's not like, I wouldn't say he's influencing their decision making necessarily, but he's like a voice on the headset, and he's obviously a very powerful voice because everybody in that building reveres him, especially Hackett. And I would say it's likely, and if not definite, that he's had like suggestions that like have been called kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's valuable to have him. It's valuable to have him on the sideline. I think you saw the camera catch him like shaking his head at one play call. I mean, I'm sure that's probably like assuming that's like how he's reacting to everything is probably unfair, but it was like pretty, especially in the moment because the offense was playing so poorly. Everybody latched onto that, obviously. But yeah, I'm curious to see how that evolves, especially when, as you mentioned, as he gets back in the building and he's here during the week. Like, how much different will it be where he's a part of the game planning, watching film with them? Like, I'm curious if that will like increase his role or what that'll look like. But yeah, I think having him around is a positive for sure.
Give me your honest assessment. So the Jets had been historically piss poor, as to be blunt, on the third down conversion action so far this season against the Raiders. 7 of 16. While they still lose the game, like whoa, that's not like from 1 to 2 conversions a game to like 3 or 4, like 7. That's pretty dramatic. That's a massive increase. Is that a random outlier in your mind? Or as we head into this Bills game, they found something, whatever that is, and now it's like okay, that's a sign of what they can do on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I'm not as confident that it's a sign of things to come because I think a lot of those first downs came at the end of the game. A lot of Zach Wilson's yards came. I think he had like 90 yards on the last 2 drives. Mm-hmm. He's at his best in those moments, clearly outside of the interception. But they need to do it for 4 quarters like this. The lack of progression throughout the season, if not regression, that they've had on offense is just mind blowing to me. And all this. If you remember going into that Chiefs game. Or after the Chiefs game, when the offense had played well, you had guys like Hunter McGovern in the locker room being like, yeah, the coach said, this week we're not going to play not to lose. We're going to play to win. Like, where is that mindset gone? Because the way they call plays is just, they're so scared to do anything in the passing game. And I've said this on my podcast a lot. I've written about it. Like, it's kind of, I always can make this comparison because it's the first one that comes to my head. Like if you're like scared of a dog, you're not supposed to like show the dog that you're scared, otherwise it's going to react to your fear. And so not to compare Zach to like a puppy or anything, but like I'm sure Zach can sense that his coaches are scared that he's going to fuck up. And so he's just doing his very best to not fuck up. And then what you're seeing is, he's not throwing outside of that interception. He's not really throwing interceptions, but he's not really doing much else in terms of throwing it down the field, which he should be. Like, for whatever I think about Zach, which is I don't think he's a very good quarterback. He has an arm. He has athleticism. Like, they do not like, they're not trying to highlight the things that he's good at. They're trying to avoid the things he's bad at. And with how bad the offense has been, it's just crazy to me that they haven't flipped that script yet. And I get that they're trying to do like the grind out a 13-10 win every week, but it's just not sustainable. As you've seen, they've lost now to 2 defenses that are pretty bad. The Chargers, I don't know if they still are, because the Jets have a way of like helping a team's rankings, but they were the worst pass defense in the league when the Jets played the Chargers and the Jets couldn't score. The Raiders have Max Crosby and not a lot else on defense, and they couldn't really do anything against them. So the passing offense, the decision-making, the tendencies, why they're not throwing the ball to Breece Hall more, like all the stuff that all the fans have talked about, obviously, and you've, I'm sure, talked about, like, it just doesn't really make any sense to me. And that's the biggest. Like, they're not doing – if it wasn't working and you're doing all the things that make sense, then you could be like, okay, so clearly there's an issue of talent or personnel or whatever it is, but they're not doing things that make sense. So
That's true. And the weird thing is your dog analogy, to go to the Raiders game, it seemed like all of that happened in the same game. It seemed like there was some juice at the beginning of the game, drive, drive, drive. And again,
Yeah.
it's a bunch of field goals. You're like, oh, okay, baby. This seems a lot different than we've seen before. It was their first, which again is somewhat pathetic in week 10, their first, opening drive points of a season is a 3-piece combo. But I guess we can't be nitpicky. Beggars can't be choosers, I guess. But we're getting that. I'm like, oh, baby. And then all of a sudden it fell off a cliff. It's almost as if, to your point, that they had that aggressiveness change, play to win, to play not to lose mentality in the middle of a game, which seemingly made no sense, especially against a Raiders team that was defanged a little bit when you consider all the changes, interim, this, that, or the others. That part was bizarre to me and hard to explain.
Yeah. That, and they have a tendency to, as you know, obviously, is like where they run on first and second down, or they run it on second and long. And if the running game was working, like, it's like an interesting balance, because they should be running the ball a lot, but also if the defense knows that's what you're doing every play, it's going to be easy to stop. And then, that's why this is a complicated conversation. Then you have like Dalvin Cook finally like showing some juice, and then you pull him out right away, and then you put Michael Carter in there, and he's a disaster. Like it's so it's just a lot of stuff. It's like small stuff like that. Like they're like, it's like sometimes they call plays with their hands tied behind, one hand tied behind their back, and I don't really get it.
Yeah, Nathaniel Hackett didn't catch a lot of flack for this, but I tweeted out in the middle of the game, on the first couple of drives, he was super predictable with run, pass, but it all worked out because the passes were successful on third down, so he converted. But I was still like, I still didn't love it. Like, it worked, like a God bless America, phenomenal, but that was still super predictable, which is interesting.
I'll say it's even okay to start out like that, but then you got to work in the play actions, because so then if they're expecting you to run in, you throw a play action at them, in theory, that should open things up. So, but they don't really do that enough. So I don't know.
All right, so Robert Saleh, again, we're speaking with Zach friggin' Rosenblatt, baby, from The Athletic, the Can't Wait podcast, which you could do, Tim McMaster, and Marissa, who's there in spirit, of course. She'll
She'll be back in January. She's coming back soon.
Hey, who's coming back first, Marissa or Aaron Rodgers?
I think we talked about that at some point this season, but it's a good question. I feel like based on what Rodgers told Melissa Stark, it'll be Rodgers first.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know if I believe that, so I'll say Marissa.
Okay, yeah, I like that. Okay, very nice. So Robert Saleh says he won't be making a change. So the starting quarterback is Zach Wilson, and Nathaniel Hackett is the play caller. Again, that doesn't really surprise me, but he did announce that. But he did say we could see some schematic changes potentially and personnel changes. Zach Rosenblatt put on the speculative cap because he said, of course, we got to keep that in house. Got to fool the Bills or something. But like, what are some of those changes we could see in your mind if you were to predict it?
I will say the keep it in house thing has like bore itself out, because like people I've talked in the building, like I've said, there's changes coming, but they won't tell me what they are either. So they are keeping it close to the chest. I don't have like exclusives for you on that, but like I don't think the personnel changes, I can't see it being anything that would make a significant impact, but I think it's some of the obvious stuff that fans have been calling for. It's, making Michael Carter a healthy scratch and bringing up Izzy to bring some juice into the offense. Whether he makes an immediate impact or not, like I don't think the expectation should be like very high, but like he's an explosive runner, and they don't have guys like that. I think, if Dwayne Brown's back, it would be putting him back in at left tackle and shuffling some things around there again. There's the CJ Uzomah, Jeremy Rucker situation, and then receiver would be either you don't play Alan Lazard as much, or you give a guy like Herb Charles or Jason Brownlee some playing time. So I think those are the only areas I can think of. If you're not changing the quarterback, there's not really much else you can do. Like Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall aren't going anywhere. Most of that offensive line, like shuffling it doesn't, like shuffling average players with other average players doesn't really change anything. But so that's all I can think of. Maybe there's something they have up their sleeve that I can't think of. But yeah, there's that, and then there's the schematic stuff is kind of the stuff we've been talking about. It's getting Breece the ball as a passer, getting Xavier Gibson the ball in space, changing up your tendencies a little bit, throwing it downfield, getting it to Garrett Wilson quickly on slants, like all the stuff that they should have been doing anyway. So you hope that that's the stuff, but at the same time, you're like, why did it take until week 11 for you guys to decide to do this? Yeah.
That's a fair follow up, Mr. Zack Rosenblatt.
Yeah.
That's for certain. Let me ask you this: pony package stuff. That's a thing fans have been asking for. Last year, I keep going back to this play. Week 5, the Jets had Breece Hall to the left, Michael Carter to the right, play action across the face with Michael Carter almost as a distraction decoy in the flat. Breece Hall runs the wheel and he just fires it to him. Breece Hall, open space, crazy big play. They have done like none of that. And then Zach, you were there for this one in training camp. They ran the 5 verts, Breece Hall slant underneath, cutting up against the grain against the defense. I saw that and said, oh man, can't wait for those kind of plays during the season. We've seen none of that. So it's another opportunity of things we haven't seen that I think a lot of fans have been begging for.
Yeah. And that the biggest thing that's been disappointing with the play calling is that, they don't really call plays to they don't scheme receivers open. Like a lot of times you'll see teams running plays where, and they did one, I think on one of the Gibson plays where it was a good play call, but where hey, you have receiver running one way, another running the other way, and it kind of sets a pick to free open the other guy. And they haven't really done that very often, which, a lot of times you have everybody going down the field and there's one guy in the short area and he's not open and Zach runs. And so whatever it is, they need the 2 running back thing is intriguing. Even especially if Dalvin Cook's heating up, which maybe, it was only a few carries, so it's hard to say for sure. But him and Breece are an intriguing combo if both are at their best, because their skill sets kind of complement each other. So I do like the idea of more 21 personnel or 22, even because you need 2 tight ends in there for extra blockers. But yeah, it's stuff like that. It's just scheming these guys open and scheming playmakers to getting the ball.
Let me ask you this: 2 games back of the division, Jets play at Bills, home versus the Dolphins on Black Friday. So I just have to ask you this question, Zach. Should I purchase the AFC East title T-shirts, the parade? Should we start to organize that? Where are we at there?
We'll know after these 2 weeks if they're a team that we should take seriously. This is, I said it on my podcast today, it's like the make or break slate of the season. The AFC is so crazy standings-wise, and I don't know if that works for or against the Jets' favor because there's going to be a lot of teams fighting for those wild card spots. So losing these games to the Raiders and Chargers really hurts you later because the conference record is what gets taken into account for wild card. But the division, it's probably not realistic to expect this team to compete for the AFC East, as you obviously know. But if they go and beat the Bills this week, and then depending on what happens in that Dolphins game, then you can start dreaming again. It's kind of what happened last year where they beat the Bills in that one game, and everybody's felt pretty good. I did too. We're all naive, I guess. But yeah, it's funny. I talk about this on my podcast a lot. When you go into a season, you look at the schedule, you're like, this part looks easy, this part looks hard. Then the season actually happens, and that's not actually even the Bills win doesn't look as good now. And whereas the Texans looks like it might be one of the hardest games on the schedule. So I don't think their schedule the rest of the way is easy as maybe fans thought it might be. But this 2-game division stretch is going to decide if this team is a playoff contender or not.
Let me know if this is good news or bad news. This week, the Buffalo Bills fire their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, and now Joe Brady will get it, and people remember that name. He was a sexy young guy who got some head coaching interviews, Panthers, LSU, a lot of love. Is it good news or bad news for the Jets that the Bills fired their offensive coordinator the week of their game?
You kind of never know how those things are going to play out. It does seem like most of the time the first week after a coach is fired is when a team is at their best. So I would say it's not ideal, especially if the Bills are highly motivated after that stinker they put up last night. Josh Allen is going to be motivated to beat the Jets because he struggled against them, obviously, and that's going to be everybody's going to ask him about that this week. So I'd lean towards it being not a great thing, but especially because they have the talent. They have Stephon Diggs, they have Josh Allen, they have Dalton Kincaid, who looks really good at tight end. They have James Cook, who is the better cook at this point in his career. He looks really good. So yeah, I'd lean more towards concern. I can't imagine their offense would change a lot. Maybe their tendencies might change a little bit, but yeah, usually a team in a slump, you change something up, it kind of for a week at least, you get a boost, which is what Jet fans obviously have been reacting to today when they saw that. It's oh, interesting. Yeah, you make a change, but and I think that's the interesting part to me. So it's kind of perfect timing, or not for Saleh, but it's kind of perfect timing that the Bills are doing this the week they play the Jets, because if they go out there, the Bills offense looks good after making a change and the Jets offense looks bad. Saleh's going to have a hard time answering those questions. So I think this is a very interesting week for both teams.
And speaking of that, Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas, Nathaniel Hackett, are they safe no matter what happens this season?
I don't think you could say no matter what happens. I do lean towards them being safe because there is the carrot of Aaron coming back next year. But I also know that Woody Johnson is tired of losing. Historically, he hasn't been the most patient. He gave these guys a third year. It's pretty rare for a tandem of GM head coach to make it to a fourth year. It would be more than four for Joe, but to make it to a fourth year without a winning record. And so that's where I'm very curious to see how this offseason goes. But I lean towards them all being safe. But if this is a disastrous end of the season, if they lose every game, if they win 5-6 games, like, I don't know. I don't know that the whole trio will be back, but I can't say that with certainty. I lean towards them being safe because the circumstances have them here, but I don't get the impression that they've been like guaranteed job security necessarily. I just think that they were banking it all on Rodgers and it failed. And then, because of that, not only because of that, but a big part of because of that, a lot of their moves this offseason looked like bad moves in retrospect. And didn't seem like they were very well prepared for the loss of Rodgers, which, you can't blame them entirely because you don't really plan for the quarterback to go down 4 plays in. But, if they keep losing week after week, then their seats are probably going to feel a little warmer, I would say.
All right. A couple quickies here before we get you out of here, Zach. Is Mekhi Becton going to be back in 2024?
That's a good question. My prediction right this second would be no.
Okay.
Because I think if he stays healthy the rest of the season, I think he's going to play his way into some pretty good money. And I don't know if the Jets are going to be willing to commit that to him. But it kind of goes back to your previous question. It's hard to answer without knowing that this entire regime will be back or not, because that could factor in. But yeah, if I was predicting, I'd say no. And they kind of reboot the O-line a little bit, at least at tackle, because you have Dwayne, who probably I would think would not come back. And so, maybe if you feel good about Max at one side and you see what you have in Carter Warren, but I would think they either draft one or figure something out, because that's just my guess. I think Mekhi might play his way out of like the financial range the Jets would be willing to go.
All right, let me put an interesting follow-up here. It just came up to me. But so Mekhi Becton, let's say he stays healthy the rest of the year, and he's on the same track in terms of how well he's performed. And Bryce Huff, he plays as well as he has the entire season. The Jets have one franchise tag. What do you do?
If they're using the franchise tag, I think they would use it on Huff.
Okay.
Out of those two. The Huff thing is fascinating because I think he's played even better than they could have even imagined. Like he's become like a legit, like Pro Bowl talent. Like I think he doesn't play enough. If he played more snaps, his numbers might be even better, frankly. But he has 5 sacks. If he keeps up his recent pace, he'll probably get close to 10, if not 10. And I think that was the biggest thing for it in these negotiations. And the Jets can act like sacks don't matter, but when these teams negotiate with these guys, they point at sacks. So if you're a guy that gets a lot of pressures, and then you go into the negotiation, be like, well, yeah, he has a lot of pressure, but he doesn't have a lot of sacks. Sacks pay the bills. And so if Bryce Huff keeps playing as well as he is, he's becoming more and more. I saw that Rashawn Gary contract, and that really opened my eyes for what Bryce can make, because their numbers are pretty similar, and Bryce plays less than Gary, I believe, still. So I think Bryce, if he hit free agency, is going to make really good money. Do the Jets want to commit a franchise tag to him? They did just draft Will McDonald in the first round, but do you know if he's ready to be the guy? There's a lot of factors here. I 100% would re-sign him. Bryce is only 25. You pair him and Jermaine Johnson together for the next 5 years, and you're just set up at defensive end for a long time. And so I hope they re-sign him. He's a great guy, great player. His teammates love him. He's getting better every single year, and that's not a guy you let leave. You don't let a young homegrown talent leave for nothing. And if they do that, Joe Douglas is going to get a lot of anger from the fan base, because I know how much they love Bryce.
There was some reporter who was high on Bryce Huff before last year. I can't remember who that was, Zach.
I've been I was part of the free Bryce Huff movement. Remember, he was a healthy scratch at one point last year, which is crazy to think
first
about.
3 games of the season. The first 3 games of the season, he was a healthy scratch. That's looking back at that now. Then we were screaming about it as fans, but
it's one of those things that ages very poorly as time passes, for sure. Yeah.
That's for certain. All right. The Jets penalty problem. So, I have not been satisfied by the answer by Robert Saleh. So I will now just ask that question to you, Zack Rosenblatt. They were pretty good with penalties through whatever it was the first 3 weeks of the season. Yeah. That's been terrible. They've had 50 penalties over the last 6 games for 389 yards. That's a wild number. I just ask you, can that be fixed? Like what clicked in like week 4 that apparently everything has exploded, that Robert Sala said, I really don't want to get into that publicly. Like there's some conspiracy theory. Like I'm trying to understand what he means when he gives these weird answers to that.
I think he tries to not criticize guys publicly, so I think it's becoming harder and harder with those situations. Because those penalties on offense in particular, like, were drive killers and touchdown killers, and that was one of the more brutal. And I think that's why you have the legion of the side of Jets fans who are like, it's not Zach's fault, who have taken that to like an extreme at this point. If you criticize anything other than Zach, they're like, oh, but I thought that's Zach's fault, and it's like gone way too far the other direction.
Yeah.
But the penalties are, when they happen this consistently, it falls on the coaching staff. I've always felt that way because I know you can't control if CJ Uzomah holds the guy in front of him, or if Bryce Huff. I thought his roughing the passer was a little ticky tacky. He like barely touched it. Yeah, it was weak. But I mean, if a guy does those things, like, a coach didn't do it, the player made the decision to do those things. But also, this is happening every week, and so I don't know if it means more accountability, where you bench a guy if he messes up, or you make him run laps, or like Joe Judge used to. I don't know. But it falls on the coach staff. If it's a consistent problem, and Robert Sala can say all he wants, it's not on one guy. Well, if it's not on one guy and you have all these issues, especially penalties, then that means it's on you as the head coach. So I think that he and this coaching staff, whatever they need to do behind the scenes to get them to stop committing these dumb penalties, like they probably would have won at least one of these last 2 games without all those penalties, frankly. So you're right. It was not a problem for most of the season. Now it feels like this is their identity, but it wasn't their identity for most of the season. Like, the mistakes were not penalties before this. It was other stuff. Now they've made other mistakes too, but the penalties have made it even worse because they can't get yards on offense, and so it's been absolutely killer.
All right, Zach, let's end on this. Very early, obviously, injury reports and things can change. Jets Bills prediction. Come on, baby. Again, I mentioned my AFC East T-shirts. It's in the shopping cart. I haven't purchased yet. I'm kind of waiting on your answer here. Yeah.
It's like how you guys used to ask me when I would go on your radio show on Tuesday, and I'd forget that you were going to ask me that every week.
Yeah, phenomenal. We love that bit. Yeah.
As we're sitting here right here today, especially with the Bills coaching change, I'll say Bills 16, Jets 10.
Okay, that would be the first Zach Wilson loss against the Bills in the last 2 years. So a little bit of kryptonite, perhaps. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Zach, you do amazing work for The Athletic, and of course the Can't Wait podcast with Tim McMaster, and everybody. We appreciate you, man. So thanks for carving out the time.
Yeah, thanks, Boy Green.
There he is, Zach Rosenblatt. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Take care.